It's the first election in Iran since the government signed a controversial nuclear deal with world powers, a test on 4 years of leadership by reformist President Hassan Rouhani. But in a country dominated by hardliners, how much power does the president have? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. It is one of the most important elections in Iran in many years. Millions of voters will head to the polls soon to decide if they will stick with President Hassan Rouhani, the man who signed Iran's controversial nuclear agreement with world powers, or give a chance to any of the 5 other main candidates challenging him. Now, the economy has been a big part of this election campaign. Although it's been improving slightly, many say President Rouhani hasn't done enough to lower unemployment and increase trade. We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, here's how President Rouhani defended his economic record during a presidential debate on Friday.
The condition of our work and trade has improved. Therefore, the circumstances for work and trade have improved. The work and trade environment is the most important issue. Trust in investment has emerged in our society. Without trust in investment, there would be no job creation.
Your Excellency, at the beginning of your term, you promised our dear people that you would create 4 million jobs.
I have never, in any period of time, promised to create 4 million jobs. This is a sheer lie.
The International Monetary Fund says Iran's economy has seen what it calls an impressive recovery. So let's take a closer look. The IMF expects the economy to grow by 6.6% this year, reflecting the rebound in oil production and exports. But that growth is uncertain if there are any changes to the nuclear deal or relations with the United States. The government of Hassan Rouhani has managed to contain inflation from around 40% in 2013 to 7.5% last year. But unemployment is still above 12%, with women and young people particularly hardest hit. Now let's get the thoughts of our guests. Joining us in London, Saeed Bazin, an Iranian analyst in Tehran, Mohammad Marandi, professor at the University of Tehran. And in London, joining us on Skype, Anise Basiri Tabrisi. She's a research fellow at RUSI, that's the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you very much for joining us, all 3 of you. Mohammad Marandi, I think it's fair to say these are pretty important elections in the history of Iran. Do you think the country's going to stay the course or veer off in a different direction?
Well, all elections, especially in the last couple of decades, have been important, very important, the presidential elections. It's hard to say because it depends really on the debates. The candidates are focused mostly on the economy, and unemployment is, according to polls, the most important issue. There isn't a huge difference with regards to foreign policy. The current candidates believe that the nuclear agreement, with its positive or perceived negative elements, that it must be retained and that it must be implemented. None of the candidates, the candidates that we see in this election are more centrist on the whole than in some previous presidential debates. So I think the focus will be on the economy. The first debate was very hard-hitting. It was a very interesting debate, but we still have 2 more left. There are lots of programs on television. The different candidates have their own ads. They have time to speak to the public. But the most important element, or the factor that will determine the fate of the election, I think, will be the 3 debates. Anise
Basiri Tabrisi, I mean, are these elections important? Because, as Mohammad Marandi was saying, all elections are important in Iran. Or is there something different going on here? Can we have other expectations?
Absolutely. Presidential elections are always important. There is a general tendency to think that Iran's foreign posture or direction doesn't change because everything is determined by the supreme leader, but we have seen the different attitudes of the presidencies throughout the last couple of decades, despite what Professor Marandi has said this time, meaning no main differences among the main candidates on foreign policy issues, especially on the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, which was announced and agreed on with the international community in July 2015. I agree with Professor Marandi that the economy will be the main issue and that the presidential debate will determine the outcome of the election. Even in June 2013, Rouhani was not really a favorite candidate until really the debates kicked in, particularly the last one. So to see what will be the outcome and whether Rouhani will see his mandate renewed, we'll really have to see how the debates will go on.
Said Bazi, clearly everyone agrees these are important elections, and I guess what makes it very important this year is the economy and how economy really has risen up to the top of the concerns, the problems, the issues that need to be dealt with in people's minds.
Well, I think I tend to disagree with the two previous speakers on the fact that it's not going to impact on foreign policy. I think elections do determine the consequences of foreign policy. As we saw 4 years ago, it brought Rouhani to power with a clear mandate to change foreign policy and sign the nuclear deal. So elections do impact on foreign policy, and foreign policy is not simply determined by the supreme leader, although the influence of the president is somewhat limited on foreign policy. This election, I think more than anything else, shows that there are two camps. Although there are 6 candidates, there are 2 camps. One is the centrist reformist camp being represented by Mr. Rouhani and his vice president Jahangiri. And then there is a revolutionary camp, the opposition camp, being represented by Mr. Ghalibaf, the Tehran mayor, and Mr. Raisi, who is the head of the country's largest religious endowment, a massive commercial establishment. And these 2 camps represent 2 points of view on foreign policy, on domestic affairs, and on the economy. Of course, economy is an important element, but I think foreign affairs and domestic affairs will also impact in the debates as we will have them in the next couple of weeks.
Mohammed, is this the right paradigm when you talk about the elections, to view it in 2 camps, the reformists and the conservatives?
No, I think it's much more complicated than that. The reformist camp is a sort of rainbow camp. There are many different variations, different flavors, and the conservative or principlist camp, whatever one may wish to call it, they have very differing views, and the moderates as well. And we do see in local elections, sometimes even on campuses, we see differing alliances taking place. In this particular case, why I would say that the foreign policy is not the main issue is that 4 years ago, when President Rouhani was standing for election, the current mayor of Tehran, who is also a candidate this time round, he too was planning to put Dr. Zarif, our current foreign minister, in the cabinet as his foreign minister. And Mr. Raisi, who is another candidate this time around, has a positive relationship with Dr. Zarif. Whereas in the election 4 years ago, I think there were more, let's say, diverse views with regards to foreign policy. The president, of course, the foreign policy is very complicated in Iran because there are differing elements. There's the Supreme National Security Council, there's the leader, there's the president, there's parliament. But in general, there isn't any major difference being declared by any of the candidates.
All right. Before we get into the direction that Iran is likely to go, let's talk about the supreme leader, the man who controls the shots here, because once we've dealt with him, I think we can understand the issues a lot better. Iran's constitution describes the president as the 2nd highest ranking official in the Islamic Republic. So how does this work? At the top of Iran's power structure is the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He has control over the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. He's also Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces and controls the intelligence and security operations. The president is the highest elected official in Iran. He's responsible for setting the country's economic policies. But the president answers to the Supreme Leader, who also outlines the procedures for the presidential election. Anise, does this hold back progress in the country? Does it really matter who is head of the government if you've got the Supreme Leader pulling the strings at the end of the day?
Absolutely. And as I was saying before, we have seen actually a different posture of Iran in foreign policy because of who was president. So I believe that part of the reason why we arrived to, for instance, the nuclear agreement in 2015, it's because Rouhani was the president back then. We had like more than 12 years of negotiation with 3 different presidents and different postures of Iran towards the negotiations and the international community, even if the red lines were always the same and they were clearly defined by the Supreme Leader, the Supreme National Council, Security Council. We know that there have been different tactics by the different presidencies. And similarly, on other issues, even if the red lines are the same and they are set up by the Supreme Leader, the posture and the tactics used by different administrations change. So whoever is going to be the next president, that is going to determine how the next president and the next 4 years of Iran's foreign policy attitude, for instance, towards the West or other countries in the region, will be determined. So I think that is a key issue and shouldn't be undermined.
Okay, we'll go back to foreign policy as well. But Said, I want to talk a little bit more about the Supreme Leader. I mean, is he still viewed as being as relevant as he is? Is it anachronistic, the system there with the growing number of youth? Is this something that Iranians still want?
You see, Iran obviously is not a full democracy as we understand it in modern history. It's not a totally open society. Elections, for example, are not totally free and fair. However, it's a multipolar system. That means power is not in the control of a single person or a single institutions. There are different poles, different institutions which exercise power, influence domestic power, influence foreign policy. So there, as a result, because of this multipolar nature of the establishment, there is a political space. There is a space within which a debate takes place between different factions and different institutions, and there is debate over policy. So although the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is obviously a very powerful man, nevertheless, there are other centers of power which determine and influence policy, including the presidency, including the parliament, including the political parties, including the various sections of the bureaucracy. So to think or give the impression that Mr. Khamenei has total power and he can decide all matters of state by himself is rather not correct.
Okay, but Mohammed, I'm just wondering, sorry, excuse me jumping in here, how he balances his hardline base and the social freedoms, political freedoms demanded by so many in Iran.
Yes. I would say that, I wouldn't say actually that he has a hardline political base. On the whole, I think that what he has always been doing is that during different circumstances, he has tried to keep everyone on board. And I think that, again, this divide between hardliner and reformist is a very simplistic notion and binary that's used in the West. As your previous said, it is a very complicated political system. There are different sorts of checks and balances. With regards to the degree of democracy in Iran, I think we could say the same thing about the United States. Many people are now talking about whether a liberal democracy is really functioning in the United States, how capitalism and liberalism it distorts public opinion and so on. So we can have that discussion on any with regards to any country, but it is without a doubt a complex political system. It is a complex society, and there are checks and balances within which that framework, the leader, works.
Okay.
And what we do have is a very important election coming up soon. And the one reason, let's say, sign that these elections are so meaningful is the very fact that the turnouts are so high. The presidential election in the previous presidential election had a 73% turnout. The one before that had 82% turnout. So the election for the presidency is very important in the eyes of Iranians.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the complicated political structure that you've put forward, Mohammed. And Anisi, I'm just wondering if you see that as possibly being one of the reasons that the economy is faltering. It's not doing as well as people expected, especially after the nuclear deal. What's holding it back?
Well, the main reason for the lack of a recovery of the economy compared to the expectation is that the sanction relief didn't turn out to be as initially expected. Sanctions were lifted in January 2016 as part of the nuclear agreement, but we know that there are still US sanctions against Iran, which are not nuclear related. And because of that, there is still major reticence by the banking system and financial institution to deal and have anything to do with the Iranian entities. So because of that, we have seen a lack of engagement, or a lack of engagement compared to expectation by especially European companies, and a reticence of entering the Iranian market. And we know that the Rouhani administration relied quite a lot in terms of budget and in terms of economic recovery on the extent of FDIs, foreign direct investment. So we know that these have improved compared to prior to the sanction relief, but expectations were around $50 billion in a matter of months after the sanctions were going to be lifted. And we know that 1 year after, a little bit over a year after sanctions were lifted, we are talking about roughly 10 to 11 billion dollars in foreign direct investment. So, okay, of course, when also we are talking about the importance of the economy in the current elections, and we are kind of dismissing the role of foreign policy, that's quite incorrect, because of course the two go hand in hand. The implication of the JCPOA, the implication of the nuclear deal is something very, very closely related also to the Iranian economy. And I think this is something that on which the Rouhani administration will have to respond somehow during the electoral campaign and the presidential debates.
So, Saeed, I guess that possibly the leadership can no longer blame the West for all its economic problems. Maybe I'm wrong, and they'll continue to do that. I mean, now it's up to the Iranians, isn't it? Most of these stumbling blocks have been removed, though there are still some sanctions in place.
Well, no, I'm afraid contrary to what you say, the Iranian leader will continue to blame not only the economic problems, but all the problems of the country on the West. That is a part of his ideology and psychological and political makeup. I'm afraid there's not going to be any change in the leader's position. But can I just challenge Mr. Marandi on a couple of points? Clearly, these elections are about two different political positions, one conservative revolutionary and one reformist. This is what this election is about, to fudge the differences, to say, oh, well, there are different alliances. When did we have Mr. Raisi looking kindly on Mr. Zarif's foreign policy? No, absolutely. They have different positions, they have different approaches on policy, on domestic politics, on the economic matters. The differences are significant, and this is Mr. Marandi, I think, is somewhat presenting the views of the revolutionary camp. Well, there's not much difference between us in terms of foreign policy. Well, there are differences, and people do recognize these differences, and I think foreign policy will be a significant element in the elections. So far as the economy is concerned, it is an important element in the public opinion.
May I respond?
Public opinion surveys show it.
May I respond?
Public survey Please
Okay,
do.
respond briefly, because I do want to move this on to Trump and what sort of impact he's likely to have. So go ahead, Mohammed.
Well, as I said, and I think your guess is obviously incorrect. I said that Dr. Ghalibaf wanted to put Dr. Zarif as his foreign minister, and I was speaking about the similarity in foreign policy there. And he would be considered within that context that your guest is talking about, one of the revolutionaries. Dr. Raisi, or Mr. Raisi, he has, I said, a favorable view towards Dr. Zarif. His view is not, for example, identical
Well,
to
these are not
that of
sufficient,
Dr.
Mr.
Janini.
Marandi. These,
So,
the fact you
excuse me,
the fact
if you would allow me to continue.
Okay, gentlemen,
No,
if you don't mind, I'm actually going to move this. I'm going to move this away. I think we've covered the camps involved here. If you don't mind, with respect, Anissa, let's go back to Donald Trump. We are running out of time, so I want to get a few facts out still. Donald Trump, I mean, what sort of impact is this likely to have on Iran, and how do you think this will play out in the elections? We know how he feels about Iran. He's quite keen, as he said, to tear up or rip it up the nuclear agreement. How will this play?
Well, at the beginning, it seems that Trump was going to push against Iran through the nuclear issue. There were talks about a potential rip-up of the deal, or a tendency to go and ask for a renegotiation of the deal with better terms, whatever that meant. Now it seems that after a few months, after a few conversations with different parties involved in the negotiation, but also regional actors, including Saudi Arabia and Israel, on the JCPOA and the need for this to be maintained in place, it seems that the Trump administration changed its approach, and it's going to push against Iran through regional issues, such as Yemen and Syria in particular. So we already have seen this kind of tendency in the past few months. I think this is likely to continue. So in terms of the survival of the deal, I don't think this is at risk immediately, and I don't think this is something that it's going to be debated within the administration, but the risk is that the Trump administration will put indirect pressure against Iran through, again, regional issues, or, for instance, additional sanctions introduced by Congress, or issues such as presidential waiver, which indirectly put the survival of the deal under threat.
Yes, I wanted just to point out that the nuclear deal has been agreed upon by the political establishment in Iran. All of the mainstream political parties, Iranian parliament, they've approved of this. And Iran will abide by its side of the agreement. Iran is not by definition, contrary to what one of your guests was saying, anti-Western. The problem is that the West, as in the past, has not been abiding by its side of the bargain. And I'm speaking about the United States in particular. Dr. Zarif has pointed this out many times. Under the Obama administration, as well as under the current administration, the United States has not abided by its side of the bargain. And that's one of the problems that's influencing the Iranian economy. The second is, of course, with regards to economic liberalism, because in Iran, this is a debate whether liberalism should be pursued or whether the government should move towards supporting local businesses and local industries. Some people are criticizing
I'm going to have to jump in here because I want to ask you all the same question. If you could just answer it very briefly, Mohammed. Who do you think is going to be the next leader, and who should be the next leader?
I don't know. I think that it's going to go to the second round most probably. I would assume that in the second round at this stage, it will be between the current president and probably the mayor of Tehran.
And Anissa?
Yeah, I think that the chances of the current president are high at the moment. The main reason being that there hasn't been one single president who hasn't had a second mandate in the history of the Islamic Republic. So it would be difficult not to see his 4 years of mandate being renewed.
Okay.
But I think it really will depend also on the strategy adopted by the conservatives, whether they will unite behind one single candidate as it was debated, or whether their votes will be split between Ghalibaf and Raisi.
Saeed, a name?
Yes,
I just need a name. I just need a name.
I think Just a name. I think Rouhani has a tactical advantage over the mayor of Tehran, and he will be able to play that to his advantage.
All right. All three of you, thank you very much. We shall see later on in May who was correct there. Thanks very much to Saeed Bazin, Mohammed Morandi, and Anise Basiri Tabrisi. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. Mine is @Jane Dutton. Thanks for watching.